8. Missing World War I submarines. In 2013, archaeologists discovered dozens of submerged World War I-era submarines off England's southern and eastern coasts. They counted 41 German U-boats, including some that were still officially listed as missing, and 3 British submarines, sitting at depths of up to 50 feet. U-boats inflicted heavy damage on British naval fleets during the conflict, but the Germans also took major losses. Throughout the war, around half of their 380 U-boats were lost due to their slow speed and inferior torpedo technology, which made them easy targets for British warships. The discovery of the sunken submarine graveyard gave researchers hope that they would solve some long-standing mysteries about missing U-boats and their crew. Unfortunately, the location of the wrecks presented legal complications that prevented experts from thoroughly investigating them. Because there's reason to believe that the subs contain human remains, they're considered inviolable grave sites under British law, which means that it's illegal to disturb them. At the same time, UNESCO didn't consider them to be historically valuable enough to protect. By the time the wrecked submarines were discovered, they were already in poor condition from spending nearly a century in salt water. As time wore on, they would only deteriorate more. When the story broke, archaeologists remained hopeful that they could investigate the graveyard using remotely operated vehicles, which would be the most minimally invasive way to explore the site. It's unclear whether that ever happened or if it's still in the plans. 7. Bessie White. Violent storms are known for making ships disappear, but sometimes they do the exact opposite and reveal lost vessels out from beneath the waves and sand. When Superstorm Sandy battered parts of the American East Coast in 2012, a large portion of an old shipwreck appeared on Fire Island, a popular beach destination just outside New York City. The wooden vessel had clearly been there for a long time, but went unnoticed until the storm partially unburied it. Not much is left of it, so it's impossible to identify the wreck with 100% certainty. But experts are pretty sure it's the Bessie White, a Canadian coal schooner that ran aground in 1922 after encountering heavy fog. The ship was en route from Newport News, Virginia to New Brunswick, Canada, when it struck a sandbar at Fire Island. It quickly began taking on water, but the crew managed to escape on lifeboats. Everyone survived, and only one person was injured. But the Bessie White was destroyed beyond repair, leaving the crew with no choice but to leave it behind. They spent the next few weeks salvaging as much cargo as possible and abandoned the ship. Over the years, the wreck became buried in sediment. Its reappearance after Sandy drew the attention of national headlines, but long-time visitors to the island were less surprised. While the wreck remains hidden from sight most of the time, it's known for making occasional appearances. But in its sad shape, it will most likely eventually disappear altogether. Have you discovered something interesting after a storm? Something that you wouldn't have noticed before? Tell us in the comments and hit subscribe while you're at it. 6. The Forester. Every now and then, unusually low tides expose the remnants of a wooden schooner that's typically hidden beneath the waves along the Radke-Martinez regional shoreline outside San Francisco. At first glance, the ruins aren't readily identifiable as a shipwreck, but what looks like a pile of rotten wood from far away becomes recognizable as the crumbling remains of a very old seafaring vessel. It was called the Forester, and it set sail for the first time in 1900. The 250-foot-long ship sailed all over the South Pacific, including to Australia, China, and India. The Forester even gained international recognition when it sailed from Australia to San Francisco in a record 75 days. During the schooner's later years, it operated mainly as a lumber ship, hauling timber back and forth between the American Northwest to various countries throughout the Pacific. On a typical run, it carried spruce and fir from Oregon and Washington to warmer destinations, and returned with tropical hardwood, coal, dried coconut meat called black copra, and other merchandise. The Forester was still under the command of its first and only captain, Otto Daywertis, when he decided that it was time to retire the vessel. In 1935, after spending several years living on the ship, Daywertis deliberately grounded it along the Martinez shoreline, where it remains to this day. It was the last intact schooner along the west coast until it caught fire in 1975 and was burned to the waterline, leaving behind the heavily burned and damaged ruins that can still occasionally be seen today. 5. Resurface Gray Lake relics. Located along Lake Michigan, a 35-mile stretch of coastline known as the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore is well known for the shipwreck fragments that frequently appear along the beach. Once in a while, entire wrecks appear. Some of the pieces are washed ashore, while others are exposed by shifting sands. It happens most often during the fall when the summer crowds have cleared and the waves pick up. During the 19th century, the waters off Bear Dunes, known as the Manitou Passages, functioned as a popular shipping corridor, but the area was filled with shoals and sandbars and was dangerous to the ships that passed through it. Wrecks were common, especially during rough storms, when vessels took a beating from waves while also fighting the wind and currents that pushed them into sandbars and shallow waters with rocky bottoms. After running aground and being pounded apart by rough waters, what was left of a ship often became buried and disappeared from sight. Over the years, the wrecks have periodically become visible, only to be reburied or to once again slip beneath the waves. During the fall of 2022, part of an old wooden ship peeked out from the sand. Just days later, it was completely covered by sand and water. Park Ranger Meredith Borgman told Up North Live that it was just one of several ships that she's gotten used to seeing every now and then. She said that it's always interesting to see the uncovered wrecks, especially when she's able to see parts of a ship that weren't visible the last time it appeared. Unfortunately, between being buried most of the time and heavily damaged from being battered by the lake's infamously destructive waters for years on end, it's hard to find any identifiable markings on many of the wrecks. For these reasons, the ship that appeared in 2022 and many others along the shoreline remain unidentified. But having no name doesn't make them any less significant. Many of the vessels are the final resting places of crew members who perished when disaster struck and are therefore protected sites under state law. Bowman encouraged the public to enjoy the wrecks, but to do so from a respectful distance. 4. Nantucket Mystery Wreck. In late 2022, Nantucket resident Matthew Polker discovered the remains of an old shipwreck along the island's south shore. It's been there for over a century, but only recently became visible due to coastal erosion. All that's left of the vessel are a handful of rotting wooden planks, and its identity is a mystery. Researchers believe it's probably a late 19th or early 20th century schooner that transported cargo to and from the island. Shortly after the discovery, local station WGBH turned to Evan Schwanfelder from the Egan Maritime Institute for some insight into the ship. He described schooners as 2, 3, or 4-masted ships that functioned as the tractor-trailer trucks of their day, carrying vital shipments of timber, coal, sugar, livestock, and other goods up and down the American East Coast. It wasn't uncommon for schooners to run aground in shallow waters, and it's entirely possible that this is what happened in the Nantucket wreck. State archaeologists are investigating the site in hopes of learning more about the mysterious ship. 3. Bald Head Island Wreck. In early 2022, the North Carolina coast experienced an exceptionally high tide known as a king tide. It revealed some ruins that were previously buried in the sand, and at first members of the nearby Shoals Club who discovered what was left of the rotting wooden structure weren't quite sure what it was. They speculated that it was a really old shipwreck, but waited on the official word from experts. In the meantime, they shared photos of the unrecognizable wreck on social media and let the public weigh in on what they thought the ruins were. State archaeologists visited the site and confirmed that the ruins were, in fact, a shipwreck. And as the beach club members also guessed correctly, the ship is very old, most likely dating back to the 19th century. Measuring 60 feet long by 12 feet wide, it was larger than a standard fishing boat of the time. For now, almost nothing is known about the vessel, including why and when it sank and whether it's a historically significant wreck. The archaeology team took samples and measurements in hopes of learning more about it, and they've received permission to remove the rest of the wreck from the site. It may have been a large schooner, according to maritime history expert Kevin P. Duffus, who took a look at what's left of the ship. He told Newsweek that identifying shipwrecks can become complicated, especially in cases where a strong storm or current washes the vessel away from its original resting place, which he thinks might be the case with the recently discovered ship. But the lack of details hasn't taken away from the excitement of the unexpected find. In a statement, the Shoals Club said that discovering the ship was like finding gold at the end of the rainbow. 2. Santo Cristo de Burgos. One day in 2020, a commercial fisherman spotted chunks of wood floating around in a sea cave along the northern Oregon coast. He notified archaeologists who visited the site and initially concluded that the pieces were just driftwood. But they tested some samples just to be sure and were shocked by the findings. The wood was identified as an ancient species called the Anacardiaceae, and it came from a tree that was felled around 1650. These were the first signs the researchers had located the wreck of a Spanish galleon called the Santo Cristo de Burgos, which vanished while sailing from the Philippines to Mexico in 1693 with a cargo of silk, porcelain, and beeswax. The discovery marked the end of a 15-year search for the vessel along the Oregon coast, which began after researchers heard rumors about wood, porcelain, and other debris washing ashore for years with no identifiable source. They were also intrigued by stories of an old shipwreck that disappeared from view during the 1920s when it became buried in sediment. All signs point towards the pieces of wood belonging to the Santo Cristo de Burgos. As they continued to investigate, archaeologists found more of the wreck. They salvaged what they could for further study in hopes of learning more about the ill-fated ship. For generations, local Native American communities had passed down stories about a huge ship that wrecked in the area centuries earlier. And according to National Geographic, mainstream society wrote these narratives off as folklore until somewhat recently, only to realize that the details add up. In the words of Siletz tribal official Robert Kenter, the galleon's discovery confirms that his ancestors knew what they were talking about and were speaking the truth. 1. The Emily G. Reed. During an especially brutal winter in 2010, rough conditions in the Pacific transformed parts of the American West Coast. Beaches in the region shrank dramatically as heavy surf battered the shoreline. Some coastal areas lost so much sand the bedrock was exposed. At Rockaway Beach in northern Oregon, where anywhere from 10 to 20 feet of the beach was sucked away by the ocean, a mysterious wooden shipwreck began to appear. It was clearly very old, but a lot of people were surprised to learn that it had been there for quite some time. Known as the Emily G. Reed, the 215-foot vessel was built in New England during the late 19th century. She spent most of her career operating as a cargo ship out of San Francisco and carrying goods to places as far away as South Africa, South America, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Toward the end of a voyage from New South Wales, Australia to Portland, Oregon in 1908, some of the ship's navigation equipment malfunctioned, causing the captain to unknowingly sail too close to the shore. By the time he'd realized it had ventured into dangerously shallow waters, it was too late to avoid disaster. The Emily G. Reed ran aground in the middle of the night and snapped in half, but conditions were too rough for the crew to swim to dry land. After watching a lifeboat vanish among the waves along with 4 crew members, the captain ordered everyone else to remain on the ship. They stayed there until morning, when the weather improved enough for them to swim to safety. 3 of the sailors who set out in the lifeboat also survived and were rescued. Over time, the Emily G. Reed became completely buried in sediment. Since then, parts of the ship have resurfaced at least a handful of times. But it hadn't been seen in 35 years when it became visible in 2010, so it was a first-time sight even for many residents. As news of the Emily G. Reed's reappearance spread, authorities reminded the public not to take anything from the wreck, which is legally classified as a protected site. Thanks for watching. Which one of these wrecks surprised you the most? Tell us in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.